Testing.
Today is Monday, March 18th, 2024. We are at the Green Ladle and we'll call the joint meeting to order at 5:32 p.m. and we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Agenda item number 2 is school committee and city council member introductions, and we'll start with the mayor and go around the room.
Hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Carl Schleen, the mayor of Lewiston.
Scott Harriman, the city council representative to the school committee and city councilor for Ward 3.
Donna Gallant, Ward 7.
Ashley Medina, Ward 5, School Committee.
Charpentier, Ward 4, School Committee.
Elizabeth Eames, Ward 3, School Committee. Janet Bowden, Ward 2.
H. Laughlin, Ward 1, School Committee.
Megan Parks at large.
Jake Langley, Superintendent.
Karen Paquette, Assistant Superintendent.
Josh Renaging, Ward 1, City Council and Technophobe.
Susan Longchamps, Ward 2, City Council.
Michael Roy, Ward 4, City Council.
Rin Sol, Ward 5, City Council.
I'm David Chittum from Ward 6 on the City Council.
Tim Gallant, Ward 7, City Council.
And the member from Ward 6 on the school committee, Megan Hurd, has an excused absence this evening. Agenda item number 3 is the fiscal year 25 school budget workshop, and Superintendent Lewis will present.
So good evening, everyone. I've put together some slides as a bit of an overview. The school committee has been working hard on the budget since early March. We started the budget back in December. It's work obviously that we do every year, and it's quite a process. We are kind of in a conversations around reductions phase at this point, and that will get heavier as we move through the next couple of weeks. Just so you have an idea of context, you have binders in front of you. You're welcome to take them if you wish. If you don't want them, it's okay to leave them behind. This is kind of a changing document. It's pretty fluid, but you may want it for reference, and you feel free to do so. That's why I made your copies. The version that you have in front of you in the binder is what's known as the superintendent's budget. So that version of the budget is what we create and produce in the Munis system, and we build off of that with input from departments and from administrators and all those that are involved in their various areas of our budget. Because it's fluid, you'll see pieces in there that could be subject to change, but obviously open to any questions you have about that, not just today, but moving forward. Love to have an open line. So if you leave tonight thinking things, please don't ever hesitate to reach out, call, email. I'll leave you my phone number, but I'm not going to say it on air. If you have questions, or you can also talk to your corresponding wards or other members of the committee with questions you may have. But the superintendent's version is bigger than what will be the next phase, which we call the school committee budget. And so that's the work that we're doing now. We kind of edit this first binder level budget, the superintendent's budget, and then we move to the school committee phase. And then there'll be one that at least I call the city council version. That would be after the school committee approves. Once you approve a budget, that will then obviously move to the referendum for voters, and that would be considered the city version. So without further ado, I'm going to share some slides, but I know that the screen is behind you, but I did provide copies of what we're going to cover. And I would say conversationally, anybody at any point in time, please feel free to ask a question, clarification, a wondering, a pondering, any of those things I think are fair game. And I'll do an overview and we'll work from there. That's okay. So I just gotta go share my screen on Zoom. Be prepared, it might make noise. And it might not. So we have a mission, vision, and strategic priorities. Those are some of the things we talked about at the retreat. We also shared at the retreat some themes and goals that have emerged in our work, and I just want to review those real quickly. These aren't by priority; they're all important. But to improve instruction systematically, improve our special education structure to improve programming, and save money potentially, grow pathways to graduation, maintain equity, social, emotional, and coping skills development efforts, school safety, and stability and communication, which I've heard from a lot of people, there might be too much communication about buses, but it's there.
Member Gallant.
Thank you. Who was at this retreat? You said you went to a retreat. Who was the retreat with?
When we had the joint meeting together here,
Who are you talking?
yes, with city council.
Well, we were here together at one time.
Yep.
I do have one question.
Sure.
5-year plan. I think we discussed that when we were here as well.
Mhm.
Is that gonna make somewhere in this system where we're gonna actually develop a school 5-year plan?
Yeah, so when you talk about 5-year plan, are you talking about facilities like LCIP, or are you talking?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So right now through the LCIP process, we have approved a facilities assessment. And we're working through pieces of that. So once we have that feedback, that will help us build out that 5-year plan. I did notice too, though, in the LCIP book that there's a number of areas where there isn't a 5-year plan, and I can understand why, but I think from a school perspective, a few things have happened. One is we had ESSER dollars from the COVID funds, and we tried to leverage those to structure our buildings with whatever we could permissible to last another 25 to 50 years with big mechanical things like HVAC systems and controls. There were things we wanted to do that aren't permissible, like fix roofs. But to keep it short, that's some of that 5-year work was paused on the anticipation of having these sunsetted items, which one of the talking points I'll have tonight is the ESSER is what we call those COVID funds from school. It actually had 4 different names, but this last one is called ESSER. Those funds are sunsetting in September. So that's one of our challenges.
Thank you.
So other challenges and factors, the state of Maine subsidy formula has resulted in an increase for us here in Lewiston, which is a good thing. Last year, we were working from a budget that had a 1.4 and then a 1.2 deficit because it shifted over time. It's always tricky to start lower at the state subsidy level. So this year, we started with an increase, but there's caveats to that increase. Some of those include the career and technical education program expansion. So about 5 years ago, when EO was going to build a new high school, there was an agreement to expand CTE programming. And while they have programs in Auburn, they operate underneath the umbrella of LRTC, which is our oversight here in Lewiston. And so we have teachers that work for Lewiston that are over at Auburn running programs, but we knew about that expansion. Connected to that expansion is more subsidy. You offer more programs, you get more teacher-related subsidy and also supplies to run the program subsidy. So when I say the subsidy is up, so are the offerings in CTE, and they don't always match each other. So you have an increase in programming, which is good for our kids, which we believe in, but an increase in subsidy, not always enough to cover all of it. So when you see subsidy go up, you think, yay, subsidy's up, but so are the costs and the expenses connected to those. We also have multilingual supports. That's an area where our subsidy increased greatly, but our enrollments have increased greatly in and around multilingual students. That funding comes in as I always want to say ratio, but it's not. It's a factor in the subsidy formula where you get 1.6 or 1.2 based on your enrollments for students that qualify. So there are additional subsidy amounts as it relates to things like multilingual or special education. So the way that formula plays out, growing enrollments has growing costs. We committee recently added with subsidy dollars, no impact to the budget in a negative way. Multilingual teachers added, what I call cultural brokers, or folks that work directly with families in different languages to help support them as they work to access school and make sure they understand it. But so those are two key areas where we saw more dollars, but we're seeing that expenditure also increase. So it's better than down, but it's not like it's just a money in the purse. We also, as a district, as you know, have lots of high needs, and with lots of high needs, it requires good supports. So that's work we try to do. Our facilities have needs that we must address. I think of other school districts that have not done a good job taking care of their buildings and their spaces. We have a lot of assets as a school system, 11 buildings, over 5,600 kids, obviously a lot of staff. And as you look to take care of those spaces and make sure that we're doing a good job with upkeep, we have some things that we're working on. So there's some asks in there. And as I mentioned earlier, those ESSER funds, to which we had millions of dollars, and we still have some big projects going on, especially at the high school, where they're doing all of the old pneumatic controls, shifting that to a modern system with all new air handlers that are the rooftop units, the big ones. Those are all being replaced as part of this project, and we're trying to have all that done by September. And so that's a big piece. But at one point in time, we had over 40 or about 40 staff that were helping support the effort in our schools with ESSER funds. And what we've done over the last 2 years on purpose is if someone leaves that position or transfers elsewhere, we've really looked in the mirror hard and saying, should we fill that knowing this is sunsetting? So we did that on purpose so that we wouldn't look up right now and say, we're trying to add 40 positions to our budget. We did not do that. We slowly over time through attrition, phase those out, repurpose the funds to do things like the high school controls that were permissible. So we don't have that big ask. There are some, but that big ask is not there.
Member Chittum? Sorry, Counselor Chittum.
Thank you. Whatever works for you. Mr. Superintendent, the ESSER funds, the COVID funds, were those dedicated as to capital projects or operation? Was there a ratio in that? Could the school department have said we want to put it all into hardware and capital, or how was that divvied up?
Yeah, so there were criteria, and there were different pockets of funds that could be used in different ways. So there were, like I said, there were 4 different disbursements. One was all about COVID mitigation. So it was masks, and it was, distancing and stickers, and, notifying the general public about the ways we could stay open as a school and following those regulations. Then it shifted to some other permissible items like mechanical things, but you had to tie it back to improving the air quality, which would also help mitigate COVID. So there were things that we couldn't do with it. Strategically, what we did, because we were having a hard time finding vendors and commercial partners to do some of the work because of every school getting this kind of money and cities then after. We strategically moved more of the heavy cost mechanical like projects to the last round of ESSER to buy time, essentially, to get the projects done. And we moved as many things as we could into the round 3 or the prior ESSER disbursement to, again, mitigate costs here locally, still try to get projects done. So some of them had earmarks of what you could and could not do, what was permissible, what wasn't. We worked as a district, again, to try to position ourselves in a smart way, support kids coming out of COVID, but also make those mechanical improvements that we wouldn't then have to use like LCIP or general fund dollars to do. So we were pretty intentional about it, but it did have constraints, some things that I wish weren't there. We could have done some other things that might not have been LCIP, like the boiler project at the middle school, which is now complete. That was a major project. You can't use ESSER for boilers. But what you can do is pair LCIP dollars to do the boiler and then knock some of the costs off of LCIP to go into other areas of the school with the air handling equipment tied to that boiler, like the gym. So try to be intentional about that's permissible. Let's do those 2 projects together to improve our school as a whole. But we could do the boiler with ESSER dollars. We had to use the local LCIP dollars, but that project scope initially was not going to cover the middle school as much as it did. We tried to leverage things in an intelligent way. So there were some constraints, but we tried to do some good things. So into my next slide, last year we cut 61 positions to make the budget something that we felt could get passage both at the city and voter level. And I can tell you straightforward, a lot of those positions were, they were vacant or unfilled, but not all of them. Some of them included some Easter things which don't save in the general fund, but it was decision time because a different round of funds was sunsetting. We're not able to do that this year. We don't have that level of positions that are unfilled that we can just reduce. And some of those unfilled positions, while they exist in our budget and aren't currently filled, we can't take them out. And I'll explain part of that as we go through. Moving to the next point, our out-of-district cost to send students to special purpose private schools continues to grow. So these are students that have really, really high levels of need. Some of it could be behavior, some of it could be physical disability, could be various ranges of learning disability or diagnoses that we can't manage in our typical public school setting. We do have some programs that help manage in what we call a nesting model, where there's a pocket of students and professionals that provide the services within our schools. We try to fill that capacity as best we can. But for the students we can't serve, right now, 133 of them, they go to special purpose private schools. In addition to that 133 students that are placed, we have somewhere around 50 that are on a waiting list, and that number varies day to day, depending on meetings and IEPs and student placements and kids moving and all of that. So we're projecting in that 200 student range of kids that we have to pay to go to somewhere else. We have to pay tuition for their placement. We have to transport them to and from. If the provider can't provide some of the services that are on the IEP, we have to try to arrange that with our own funding. And then on top of that, and I'll talk more about this, there's a reimbursement formula for people to submit to federal and state dollars. The reimbursement formula for billable services that goes back to the state of Maine is what Maine calls Maine Care Seed. And we have to pay that. So it gets submitted to the state, but then the district is responsible because that's their student. And I want to give you specific numbers, but the easiest one I've used to describe it is 62% or 68% of it is paid for by federal. The remaining 32 or 38% is paid for by local. So when I say seed money, it's that non-reimbursed chunk from federal that the district is responsible for. Excuse me. That number varies by section 28 or some other section 65, or if it's just straight reimbursement through Maine Care Qualified. So the ratios shift, but it's a massive number for us.
Counselor Sol.
Can you use your mic, please? Thank you.
Did you say that out of the 133 students, 50 of them are currently on a waiting list?
No, we have 133 students placed. We have an additional 50 waiting right now.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Counselor Glant.
Thank you. Staffing's obviously always a problem. If we had building and space, could we get staffing and reduce our costs by having our own facility? Is that a possible fix for some of the high cost?
Yes, that is a possible fix. Labor will be a challenge, but I think we're trying to do some things to bring more in-house because it will save us millions of dollars.
So would a module be a potential possibility? I mean, we have quite a bit of land and space. A lot of schools today use the double wide module to do just that, special education.
Yep, it's possible. Space is definitely a concern. I would also be thoughtful of the constructs or the structures that specialized purpose programs might need. So where a modular might come into play, it might make more sense to have a program like in a wing of a school and then use the modular for regular ed. But there's definitely some things that we can think through.
Thank you.
Counselor Roy.
Going back a little bit, we share teachers with the LRTC in Auburn or the CTE or something like that. Is Auburn reimbursing their portion of that with that?
So the region works on a subsidy model. So the additional funds we're getting from the state of Maine are to fund for those. Auburn doesn't get the regional funding that we get. So that's part of how the model works. We are working with the other 5 area schools on transportation. So they help move some of our kids and we have work that we do around making that happen. As those programs expand, because in the future they want to add firefighting, auto body, I'm forgetting one. There was a handful that I wanted to add that are industry specific, that as those continue to grow, we've already had a conversation about looking at our regional agreement to see how others can contribute based on their enrollments to help pay for the cost of this process. So right now, they don't get subsidy. We get all of it, and then we go from there. They are good partners though, so we're trying to grow that for kids. One complaint we always get is there's not enough seats for CTE. So whenever we can grow those programs, I think it helps our region. I'll talk more about the special purpose private schools in a couple of slides. Some things that I'm sure you're hearing at the city level, but also here, we have contractual increases. So in a collective bargaining agreement, people get their steps. We have negotiation processes. We have 8 different units at this point, and so when people get their steps, there's a cost to that. We're also looking at some insurance related costs. That's a number that gets projected out. We don't have an actual until usually early April. Maybe as early as this week, we'll get a cap, so that will tell us what it won't go beyond. I think I just heard Adam say next week. So I know it's end of March, we get a cap number. And then in April, we get an actual number. What that is, that's the metric that figures our contribution to people's healthcare. So whatever the school burden is, that's reflected in that number. So we project based on usage, and we hope we're close, so we're accurate. And if not, it's always better if it comes in lower, we can just reduce that in the budget. So that healthcare cost is there. Inflation, we're all living that. It's the same thing when you're buying pencils and paper for schools. Also in your binder or in that budget, we have requested 2 additional school resource officers. I anticipate that being a hot conversation. We currently have 3. This budget would maintain those 3 and request 2 more. The school committee's already had some conversation around the hard part for a school is to do things like reduce by a specialist who helps small groups of students specifically in a targeted way learn how to read at a young age versus having an SRO. So that's this kind of budget. And that's a real tricky conversation. I think as a school, we want to prioritize safety, obviously, but we also want to prioritize kids being able to read to access the rest of the world. So we get, it's hard work, but we'll try to land in the right place. But those are the hard challenges when we talk about some of the work we do. The new positions that are in this budget are requested based on needs. I didn't provide you a specific list. I've got a pretty good working knowledge of it, but large in part because those are some of the things that are on the reduction consideration list. So instead of sharing with you things the committee is already working on, I can share that when we get to that place of presenting to you the proposed budget, hopefully after the school committee approves that, we'll have that list available for you if you have questions about what's in that. Substitute needs. So we've used ESSER dollars to help pay for substitutes because we could, and it saved funds locally. Well, as that money sunsets, we're not seeing less time off usage. So family medical leave, vacant positions are often filled by long-term substitutes who do a great job for us. You name it, teachers out sick for the day or their kids out sick for a day. The substitute needs in both regular ed and special ed are great in a district our size. So in the initial budget, we doubled these sublines. I've already looked at extracting a portion of that. The real danger there is when we project the coverage needs, how will we pay for things that we don't have? And so we're trying to be conservative with it, but it's one of those areas of, I think we're risking having enough funds for those positions. We can draw from unfilled positions, but then if you fill those positions, you start to get into that tight exchange. It's also Maine paid leave law changes that are coming down the legislative through the legislative branch. They're still working on rulemaking, to my knowledge. There's a 1% fee for employers that have 15 or more folks, which we far exceed. That 1% is starting January 1st, so it's actually only half a year next year because of the timeline for it to come into play. Half of that 1% could be or by rulemaking as of today, my understanding is that will go as a deduction into people's from people's paychecks. So it's a state of Maine decision. So you pay your your retirement fee and your federal tax, and you'll also have this up to 0.5%. School districts are responsible for the other 0.5%, And some school districts, over time, believe it might be a negotiation topic to have the districts pay for that, not just in Lewiston, but elsewhere. I don't know if that will happen or not, but a district our size, the 1% next year for half a year is $382,000. So that is, when I start talking about unfunded mandates, we get into those kinds of costs. Half of that could be passed on to staff through a deduction, which is what it sounds like the rulemaking is going to do. But when we look at year two, it's full year. So it would be 382 for us or more for that 0.5%. We're also looking ahead for anticipation of CDS or Child Development Services to become a local structure. Right now, that is a state structure and state funded. There are funds behind it to provide certain services. This is for your 3 and 4-year-olds. And those students who have been identified as having a high level of need already. So kind of before school starts, IEP level of services. So right now there's legislation being worked on to transition that to local entities. We have some incurred costs around CDS already from services being provided and meetings we host and try to inform. This is a big shift. It might be a couple years out, depending on the rulemaking, but that is a big shift. We have next year, we anticipate somewhere around 100 students coming into Lewiston in that age span that have a level of need. So when the state's not responsible for providing it, we are. So when we struggle to find things like the specialist, OT, PT, speech therapist, the state's also struggling to find those folks. So they're going to say, you guys do it. So that will be a big lift, but it's not here yet, but it needs to be on our radar. What's not commonly known is that our state subsidy is highest in the state based on our level of need, which is helpful. But over $72 million of our working budget is subsidy. And then in that version of proposed 13.8 million is the additional budget as of now over last year's. It's about a 13.6% growth, again, as it stands, but we're working on that. Last bullet in this section is we do have ongoing space concerns currently, and more are projected. Today, we had another student enroll at a specific grade in a school, and it looks like we might have to move multiple kids to a different school because that enrollment is full. That class size is at 24, and adding another student to that is hard. But then if a student has siblings in different grades, do you move the whole family? Those are some of the daily decisions we have to make. Try to work to do the best thing for the family. So fixed costs, Councilor Harriman had actually shared with me that it might be helpful to know some of the fixed costs. The top of this slide, I already mentioned the 382. That's a fixed cost, but the special purpose private school tuition and the seed, the $3 million is this year alone. So we're projecting out also some additional costs associated with that. We still chase that. We have a meeting tomorrow, I believe, with Department of Education staff to try to get them to explain to us how this could have grown by 3 million when we were told there would be a cap of 6%. So some of the rulemaking and some of the actuals have far exceeded that. So more to come on that, but right now and when I say 3 million, that is currently $3 million over budgeted, which we budgeted up, knowing that this change was coming. That's going to be a real challenge. There's a minimum wage conversation right now that involves both teachers, which I'm not overly worried about. That might take a year or so to phase in, but there's another one around ed techs and other school staff. And the ed tech is 150% of the established state minimum wage. And the other school staff is a minimum of 125% of the established state minimum wage. So if that does take effect, we will have to shift in some places, not everyone everywhere, but it will shift some folks in our scales.
Counselor,
Thank you. Are those contractual or state mandates, the 150 and 120?
So that would be a state mandate. It actually may exceed some of the contractual components that we already have collective bargaining with. Many superintendents in the state have expressed concern over this measure because it kind of inserts itself into collective bargaining agreements, especially in other places in the state of Maine, where that minimum gets established.
So this was a legislative mandate. Is this fairly new?
This is currently being discussed.
Currently being discussed, and no money is attached to this. It's simply another unfunded mandate on the municipalities and Lewiston.
I don't know of an allocation to create this transition.
Counselor Glant.
Thank you. Do we currently, would that mean reopening the bargaining units? So that, in other words, if the state says we gotta pay them 150%, not only that will be on the table, every item on a contract could be on the table?
I don't think it mandates an opener, but I think units could ask for an opener. But I also think over time, anytime there's a mandate like this, as I'm sure you know, I just want to thank you for asking the question, is when that contract does come open, people are going to want, or at least be looking for, negotiating that comparable bump everywhere. So if step one went from $5 to $10, everybody wants $5. It's not that extreme, but to your point, if it doesn't prompt an opener, which it doesn't by rule, at some point those contracts get opened up, and that salary bottom line will be discussed for sure.
One other follow-up question, do we know how close we are to the 150 or 125% based on, I know we're not probably paying everybody minimum wage, but I mean, what would that look like, or has it been looked at that we're at 105%, so it's only gonna be a 20% bump in one area and something like that?
We did at one point do a cost projection based on our current staff, and I think that was last spring or whatnot, because they were considering it then. I don't recall the number, but it was big. For some reason, I want to say 900,000 or 1 point something. It was that kind of number for us, Lewiston. Yeah.
Member Beaumont. Member Bowden.
That's okay. I missed Paul. Yeah. No, so just to kind of speak to what you guys are saying, yes, it will probably open a contract. And he kind of touched it, but not really. But just historically last year, the state of Maine required that we up teachers' pay to 40,000 as a minimum. And that came without money. And now in the works is raising it again now to 50,000. And that will probably happen next year on top of this, phased in. But yeah, it just keeps happening where, you know, the CDS thing is huge, like huge. Taking on 3 and 4-year-olds in this district is with special needs. When you just heard the numbers, we have 50 on a waiting list that we can't even get services for. And now we're going to have 103 and 4-year-olds that we're responsible for. And do we have the space for it? Probably not. So there's a lot to consider with this budget. We're in a lot of trouble when it comes to special education.
As it relates to CDS, though, that does have appropriations tied to it, and it's what we've been told is it's separate of our subsidy formula, which is really important, because if it's connected to it, it can look like you got more funds for certain services, but the whole doesn't shift. And so I worry about moving numbers to feel like you got support and then losing in other areas. So this is supposed to function separately. From what I understand, the money is set aside to try to get that up and running. What it looks like in 5 years, I don't know. But it's at least not unfunded, if that's the direction they go in transition.
I am never going to argue that teachers are overpaid. However, if these increases that are unfunded mandates from the state are coming down onto the municipalities, I wonder if a negotiation tactic for opening contracts would be develop some parity here. We are being demanded by the state to increase your salary. However, that means in order for us to balance the budget, so to speak, we're going to have to cut back on these other areas. So I just throw that out as a consideration if we are going to be forced to increase wages.
Counselor Glant.
I'll make a funny, it's great they gave us 55%. and all these unmandated things, you know? That's part of the problem, correct, right? Here's your extra money, and oh, by the way, you're gonna pay for all these items. Thank you, Augusta.
And I don't want to lose sight of the conversation, but I do find it ironic that in our projected local minimum share, which is the offset of the subsidy, was greater 4 years ago than it is today.
Yep.
So it's a thought.
This just goes back to the special purpose private schools, and I'm curious as to, since they're attending a special purpose private school, why are they attached to LPS specifically? Like, why are they not attending on?
No, it's a great question because we get asked that often. So because the student resides here and they're enrolled here, their IEP is what carries with them the level of need that they have. So when they go to the special purpose private school, they're still on our enrollments. We own them, if you will. And we have folks that all they do all day long is manage the IEPs, the chapter 33 meetings, the transportation, the placements to and from of those 133 kids currently, which used to be 108 just a couple years ago. So that jump is big and growing.
Member Bowden.
I just wanted to add one more thing since we're on that topic. The tuition for these private schools has always been, we pay when our students attend. And the state law is now changing, and it's going to be, we pay whether our students are there or not. And on top of that, most of these schools, and we got a chart that showed it, have raised their tuitions through the roof. And so it's, again, just adding on to the fund that we're dealing with on the budget side with special education.
Member Glant.
Yes, to add to that, some of the projections or some of the increases are 100%. Some are 116%. And we're talking millions of dollars. And if there's a possibility that we could somehow bring back some of these kids to us, if we had the teachers and the space, we would be saving what, $1 million a year, at least.
I think there's yes, to your point, yes.
Right.
There's savings to be had by
Right.
bringing them back.
So I think we've talked about this in our committee, is that if we could do that, if we could bring these kids back to us, we would have incurred expenses up front. We would have to pay for room and teachers and specialists, but over a period of time, we would come out even, or not have that much money going out. So I'm advocate for that. I really think that would suit our students, their families, and the budget. If somehow we could get those students back to us, at least a portion of them. I think we talked, if we could get 50 back, and we had the space, there's some thought that we might have a wing, some space for that, and hire the teachers, get what we need for them. The cost would incur, but over time, it would even out, and we would save millions of dollars. Thank you.
Just rough numbers, we're spending $15 million on 133 kids going elsewhere. $15 million between tuition, seed, transportation, additional services we provide, the folks that we have to help manage them appropriately. And we're also legally responsible for them. And sometimes things go wrong at the special purpose private schools, and we have to enter into due process, which is our own legal fees or lawyer fees connected to it. So it's a compounding thing that one of my future slides is going to touch on it, but I do think it's important to say that it's not just about bringing our kids home to save dollars. These are kids that are asked to get up in the morning at like 6 o'clock to get on a van to drive to Saco and then transport back home, really late. This is just a bad plan for a child. To have them be in our city around their peers and whether it's a special purpose nesting or wing or whatever, they get to come to school at a regular time and go home at a regular time like all their peers do. I think it's critically important. And when we look at kids who might be on the fringe of, well, could they transition back to regular ed? Well, we don't see them every day. So we would like to think that they're on their path, and some it's not reasonable because of the level of need that they have. But we have staff that just monitor that as best they can from a distance to transition kids back. And we've done some of that this year, but we could probably do a whole lot more if they were in-house. We could see how they behave every day, or they could integrate for a period or for an afternoon, or, those kinds of transitions. So not only could you save money, you could provide a better education for kids, but they're also where they should be at school, and they might be able to transition out of that level of need because of the services we can find and see here, but we're also observing it happen. So I'll say less on the next slide, that I wanted to build out that very conversation, because I think there's two factors. It's the cost, but it's also it's what's good for kids.
So just to follow up on that, is there like any type of like preliminary like budgeting idea of how much that would cost? And are there any partners within the community? I think about like Next Step High, for instance, like is there any programs where possibly service providers within the community could help to support that? Because it's probably not in this budget, right?
Right. So,
Okay.
I mean, we do have some community partnerships that are in this general fund, that cost us money, but they're good. They're good, for kids. But there's other things. So it just as a side, so Next Step is a portion of our operating, structure. So that's Lewiston Public Schools programming. We do work collaboratively with Tree Street. They provide, additional supports around positive youth development and trying to help with kids and relationships. And that's a good partnership that seems to be working. But yes, looking for other partnerships, especially as it relates to like CDS, we will have to have community partners who provide certain services that we won't be able to provide. We know that up front. That'll be a contract relationship with a vendor, not to use just straight business terms, but there will be people that provide outside services with those kids. But again, that one has money behind it. Whereas this version, if the kid goes, it's an invoice coming in.
I just wanted to speak to Member Gallant's suggestion about bringing the kids home. My granddaughter she did go to Lewiston. She just recently went over to Auburn. So does that funding cut from Lewiston and then Auburn picks that up? Because she now goes all the way to Winthrop, and that's a really long journey for her.
Yeah, so if a student changes their enrollment from Lewiston to, say, Auburn, that subsidy goes with that student, so they're no longer ours, they're theirs. But also with that,
of age, correct?
yeah, so it's the subsidy is based on enrollment numbers that we submit October 1st and in April, and they kind of reconcile each other. But we get the subsidy for our kids, and Auburn would get the subsidy for their kids. So your example would be their subsidy, but also when you have subsidy for a student that the rate's not going to cover the specialized need, that's when you get into the general fund conversation. So if we have a student go to Saco, from my example, and it costs us $10,000 a year to transport them, and the tuition is $100,000 a year, we're not getting subsidy for that much money, not even close. And so that's a cost that we incur.
I don't know if this is a question that can be answered. How many spots do Lewiston students have in each of these special purpose private schools? Like, are we the majority of their students? So if we pulled all of the students back from one of those schools, would in theory, those teachers would need to then find new jobs and potentially could come to Lewiston? Or do we not have that many? Do we not have that many students in those programs?
Well, I'll take them, the staff anyway. I'll take the staff. My understanding statewide, the waiting list exists across the board. And so part of the funding shift was around creating stability for the special purpose private schools, so that if students didn't show up, they wouldn't just go without compensation. So if a student, if 10 kids didn't go to school that day, it doesn't mean they just don't pay 10 of their staff or 5 of their staff, whatever. So that was part of the initial thinking behind this change to everyday cost. I'm not worried about special purpose private schools closing because we pulled our kids back. I think there's a lot of schools that could provide services to other students they don't currently provide for if that was the case. But I do have a fact checker. You gotta come up, yeah.
Anyone
This is-
watching
this
publicly
is a-
can't hear you if you're not on mic.
And just so people know, this is Kirsten Kraft. She's our Director of Special Education and she does a phenomenal job for us.
So we have 133 currently. I know Auburn has 66 because we talk about it a lot. The other districts surrounding us have not nearly as many. Your answer about could we get some staff? I think so, because knowing that we have 133, there are certain schools. And we would be looking at taking just a certain profile of kids that we think that we can best serve based on the consultants that we work with and the programming that I feel like I can stand in front of and say, we're going to do a good job with this, because we want to do that as well. And we want to stand up to, what they're getting outside of the district as well. So I think that we could, if we paid competitively. So.
Thank you.
So the last bullet on this slide, which has not a ton of words, but a ton of information. If you figure out the FMLA pool, the special purpose tuition and seed money, the minimum wage, some of these things that we don't even know what the number might be yet, even though we've projected out. The next point to this is our salary and benefits. That's $6 million. When you're an organization our size and people get their step and they get their benefits and they get their insurance, it's a negotiated amount of certain amount of coverage. We're looking at over $10 million when you put this slide together, and that's to do nothing. So a school district our size, while we're doing the special purpose private school tuition to the volume that we are, this is a $10 million slide. That's without adding anything. That's without inflation. That's without facilities needs. From a fixed cost perspective, I really appreciate Councillor Harriman bringing it up, because we talk about it here, but until we just say it out loud that way, it's sometimes hard for people to say, well, why is the budget up again? But when you look at the size of our organization, the number of kids that we have, that's a big number. Last year, for comparative purposes, the next school closest to us enrollment wise is Portland. They're a little bigger than us, although some of their numbers are declining while ours continue to grow. I don't know if within a few years we'll exceed them, but we may. But their proposed budget was $133 million last year. And so it's over 20 million more than what we've worked with. Again, I know we're a little smaller, but comparatively, we are approaching being the largest school district in the state of Maine. Special education, I won't spend a lot of time on this slide because we've talked about it a fair amount already. One thing I didn't talk about was billable services. So under the leadership of Kirsten, we've also started billing ourselves to Medicare for things that we weren't billing for prior. That process is working and growing, and we continue to want it to grow. But when we provide certain services and it qualifies, we can submit for reimbursement as well. So prior to doing that, we were leaving that money on the table. This year, we're hoping to hit around $400,000 in reimbursement, and that is someone chasing the paperwork and making sure things are submitted on time. So there's a fair amount of clerical oversight, if you will, but Kirsten's team's been able to do that, and that's with minimal cost to the district to hire that person to do that chasing. But again, with her oversight and her team looking into it, that's revenue that comes back to the district that prior to we left out there. That last line I think is really important. Actually, the last two, budgeting with labor force realities. So some of the reductions that I'm pitching to the school committee are things that we know we need, but there's not enough of them out there. Excuse me. Funny, I fumble that, right? Speech pathologist is a good example. I think Director Crafts asked for either 4 or 5 of them, because if we do these programs in-house, we need those to provide the services. We're not going to hire 5 of them. They're not out there. They're just not. So I think we could budget 2. And if you're able to find a 3rd one, let's talk. But until then, we can't budget all of them because I don't think realistically that we can hire them. Now, we don't agree necessarily, but from a budget perspective, it's a little crude, and I think she still appreciates me most days. But we're trying to budget with that reality realm of we may need 5 of those, but we're not going to get 5, so we're going to budget 2, and then let's talk. And the fluidity of the special ed budget, I think, would allow for us to do that appropriately. And if we were to come into staff, yes, we could save money in the long run. We would work to figure that out with school committee approval. But just so you know, and if you see a headline in the paper that superintendent cuts special ed programming, what we're trying to do is balance need, cost, and available employees. The last bullet, I think, is probably the most important as it relates to special education and other required services. It's a liability either way. So whether we raise the money in the general fund to try to do things internally to save money or not, those students have to have those services provided by law. And if they're not provided, it turns to litigation. That has money tied to it. So it's tuition, it's in-house, it's litigation, it's doing right by our kids. And so when we talk about space and resources, I don't know if my analogy is a good one, but we have to weave these two things together because we're going to have those costs to send kids out until we're ready to have them back. But how do we grow capacity locally to have them back so that we stop paying so much in tuition elsewhere? That's that delicate weave. And also make that something that our community can get behind and not just be so massive of a number that they can't. So that's the challenge that we're faced with. So areas of increase, if you look at the slide, we talked about special education a lot, but the new ads there, $7.4 million, and that's tuition, seed, and 26 position requests that range from specialists down to ed techs, BHPs. So there's 26 positions requested, but again, this is another one of those areas I'm saying, what will we actually be able to hire, in my opinion, and try to make a responsible pitch with the budget. So working on reductions, last week we met and I shared categories of about $2.3 million in potential reductions. Some of those categories were talked about amongst the school committee and debated from different people's perspectives. And we have a whole lot more of that to do. We continue to look for other cost savings, and I'm hopeful that ideas will come from you or thoughts or questions that might spur something else. We vetted the subsidy. We think it's accurate. Adam does a great job really looking at the detail for us, him and Bill. So we really think that the numbers where we're going to be. The only thing that could pop up now to save us money would be the insurance number coming back less than we budgeted. It doesn't look like that's going to happen, but it's possible. A couple of years ago, we got a 0% increase, and we thought we'd be more like 7 or 8%, and we budgeted that. So when you budget 8 and it comes in at 0, you can just take 8 out, those are good days in the budget process. But if we budget it and it comes in higher, those are bad days in the budget process. So we look forward to that April date. So that's what I had for slides right now. I do want to share the very back of that packet that I gave you. There's a page that shows this is a breakdown, and you might need your magnifying glass. I apologize. But these are articles. And so school budgets are built on articles. So you have articles 1 through 11, and article 1 is regular instruction. And you can see kind of the coding beside it, which is article 2, special education. Article 3, LRTC, that's the career and technical education programs. So when you read straight across, those are just numbers by the article, but those are the budget with a historical comparison. And you can see the percent changes to the right and the total numbers. So you can see where there's some increase in costs, and some things are subsidized, some things are not. And there's more detail in the binder.
Counselor Chisholm?
Thank you. Is special purpose private included in special education?
Yes, that's an Article 2 cost.
Okay.
Yes.
I would like to encourage the school committee to put as an extremely high priority, bringing that special purpose private work back to Lewiston. As I'm astounded to hear that we're driving kids to Saco, for example. Not only is, as you point out, the time that's cannot be good for a child to be spending 2.5 hours a day in a bus. These private schools, I have no doubt, are not doing it altruistically. They're making profits. That profit is money that should be staying here in Lewiston. So I would encourage the school committee to look extremely diligently at what it's going to take over the course of the next 2 to 3 years to bring the majority of that private special education back into Lewiston. I'm fully in favor of that. I think sending our money to Saco and Woolwich, did you say?
She goes to Winthrop.
Winthrop,
Yes.
to all these other communities. I can't stress strongly enough that I would encourage you to focus on that. That looks to me like not only a good way to save money, but a good way to be beneficial to our students. Thank you.
Member Bowden?
Thank you. Just sort of as a response to that, it seems to be a very large priority of this school committee, and we're all on board with that. One of the questions that I asked Counselor Harriman a couple weeks ago was if he had any sort of idea where the council sat as far as what you would be okay with for a budget increase coming from the school committee. Because we know, like, without the reductions, what was it, 13% that we're looking at? And a big portion of that is special education, and we do have to trim it down a little bit. But, in years past, we had school committees who were just very, nope, we need to stay at this mill rate. We need to stay at this percentage. Like, you can't go above this. And it makes it impossible for us to do things like fix the special education program and keep kids in house if we don't have a little bit of wiggle room to work with. So I would pose a question to you guys. Have you had conversations yet about where you see the school budget falling percentage-wise? I know that's a hard question, but I'm curious, and it helps us along as we're looking at things that we're cutting potentially, to say, wait a minute, we have this much wiggle room. Like, can we keep this in? Like, we kind of need some direction from you guys as far as where your head is at.
I'll just go down the line. Counselor Chittum, and then Counselor Sol, and then Counselor Energy.
Thank
Nothing
you.
more?
I am going to make a lot of people very unhappy by indicating that our $30 tax rate right now will go up. It is initially slated to go up by 1/6, but to $35, 4 of which is the school department, the school committee. I am in favor of putting as much money as we can into education. That is the cornerstone of our municipality. We have a lot of other issues that we need to deal with. We have to deal with homelessness. We have to deal with drug abuse. We have to deal with 14-year-old children firing off weapons in downtown. There are a lot of things on all of our collective plates. However, in my personal view, education is right up there. We cannot grow as a community if we don't invest in our future. So 1/7 of the council is very much in favor of giving you at least, I will say 1/7 at least, is very much in favor of giving you all that it can, particularly when there's a long-range goal of improving the quality of lives for our children and saving money at the same time, which is why I'm encouraging you to spend as much effort as you can. To answer your question, I can only speak for 14% of the council. I'm not prepared at this point to say that I want to approve of a $35 tax rate. My head would be on a platter if I were to do that. However, I am not eager to hold the line arbitrarily at $30 either. I know that's not concrete information for you, but it gives you a sense of where one counselor stands.
Thank you. Having been doing this for almost 10 years now, I appreciate that, because in the past, when we've had very rigid city councils that say, no matter what you do, it can't go above this point, that makes it really hard for the work that we have to do. So knowing that we have some flexibility makes that a little bit more comfortable. So thank you.
Well, as I
At least-
said,
at least for you, maybe not everyone else, but at least for
as I
you.
said, I speak only for myself, but I think it's unrealistic to say that we're going to freeze our taxes. Everything else is going up. The cost of pencils, that went down this year, didn't it? Yeah, no. Salaries are going up, insurances are going up, everything is rising. That's the economy. That's the way the economy works. So we cannot freeze our taxes. And I'm sorry to those taxpayers who are going to lynch me, but that's simply a fact of life.
Do you want to wait? Go ahead, Josh. Counselor Najee.
I am actually on the opposite side. No, I'm kidding. The situation is the idea of spending excess money on outsourcing, like, I think what we would need to see is a solid plan on how that would work on insourcing, and then also the possibility, and I mean, I'm just thinking about this, but like, if you're thinking about covering 50 students, right? Like, what is the possibility of having the room to take other students that you could actually charge for as well? For instance, if you're running specific programming, right? Because then you can actually take funding from another source. And then we can charge whatever we want to everybody else. But no, it might save travel time for other folks that live in neighboring communities, things like that. But I think it comes down to like the financial viability of the programming overall over a long term. There's obviously a huge educational benefit to it, so there's no question that's important. And you know, to speak to David's point about the 14-year-olds with handguns, the more dollars we invest in youth, both through the educational system and through services within our community, the less risk we have of folks ending up in situations that change their lives forever, and the lives of the community. So, you know, like I said, I'm optimistically looking forward to seeing some type of proposal that we could easily explain to the taxpayer to say, this is the benefit, and this is the long-term benefit. And sometimes you have to pay up front in order to make things return back. So, and it's true. You know, everything has gone up. So it's going to be really hard to run a net zero budget this year. So thanks.
Counselor Zoll.
Back to the 133 students. The 50 that are the waiting, are they currently in Lewiston schools waiting? So what's being done with what's their day like, I guess? And what I really want to know is the student ratio to teacher.
So
with those 183.
Yep. So the students that are not yet placed, referrals are in. We continue to monitor those for placements. Some have a tutoring plan where their day is not a full day. We provide the best services we can with the resource we have available. Some students are still at the school and they could be in existing special purpose programming that we have, but they might be a little much for us to handle. Some are in, you know, transitional like programs like a resource room or excuse me, self-contained spaces. But again, it's adults doing the best they can with students who have a higher level of need than we can realistically meet. And so that's 50 of them. And I think too, when we talk about how big this is, that's the 50 that we've identified that we've already submitted applications for. That's not counting the I don't know how many of kids that are struggling in the spaces they're in. But it seems to be a slow in the cogs, if you will, to move the way we want to move to support our kids because of just this backlog of 50. So
is it different for every student, or maybe it's 1-on-1, sometimes maybe 2 students to 1 teacher? What is that ratio?
So the ratio is it's all individual. And so some of the highest supported, if you will have a 1-to-1 type situation. Some of them have a 1-to-1 tutor only situation where if they do something for say 2 hours, they might become violent and fall apart. They can't do more than that in certain programming. So we try to provide everything we can in the least restrictive way possible. But there's some kids that just have such a high level of need. So it could be 1-to-1, it could be smaller groupings like 4 kids in a classroom, depending on the program, the resources we have.
Member Oden.
You almost said Beauplan again, didn't you? Director Crafts, would you mind kind of telling the city council, sorry, I spit something out, what the numbers have looked like last year versus this year versus the year before that? Like, can you kind of speak to the increase that we've seen?
So when I first started in 2021, I think it was in September of 2021, I think we were around, maybe we were between 1,100 and 1,200 students at that time. I don't know what we had for in-house programming. So when I say I want to start more in-house programming, we currently already have that here. We have an ABA programming for students with autism. We have day treatment, we have self-contained programs. That's what I would consider in-house. We also have resource level kids that are being serviced, like they are mainstream, but they're also being served in special education classrooms. So what I'm talking about doing is expanding our in-house programming. I can't remember when I first started how many we had, but my proposal that year to the committee was let's reallocate funds and make more classrooms. And we did that. So we're now up to 190 in-house that we're servicing with RISE, FLS, and day treatment. So those are kids that are, yeah.
Just want to say, prior to this programming, that would be 133 plus 190 elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So then the cost would more than double.
So we're doing that. Last year at this time, I felt like we were doing better. We were bringing kids back because when I had gone to here and asked for, can I do this plan? I want to reallocate positions and put some classrooms in at Connors. So we can cut down our outplacement costs, which we did because it was like 130-ish when I started. It went down to 108 last year. This year, we're back up to 133. The needs are getting higher. We've had a lot of students move in that already have that level of need of their IEPs. Some of them need 1-to-1s, 2-to-1s. So that's unfunded positions that I've had to request and outplacements that I then had to apply for that jumped the kids that were already on the waiting list in our own district. So we're just seeing across the board, the needs are way more. The people in my departments are in my department, not the administrators, the staff, teachers, BHPs, everybody's struggling because it's just a lot. The volume is a lot. So
Director Crafts, at what age, how old are they? Like how long are we responsible for providing special ed services for I'm going to say young adult? What is the age that we stop as a school district?
Well, 22, however, it's based on the needs. So it depends on whatever that student needs after the graduation. If they do not make it to graduation, what do they need in order to be successful? So we're looking outside of the box. We try to pair up with like voc rehab or outside, companies or partners, I guess you could say, to try to service the kids to get creative and try to do stuff, because there are a lot of group homes that have come into the city, and those fall, we end up, it's young adults that still need to work towards graduation in a manner, and they've become on our roles. Yes.
Thank you. Director Kraft, would it be better to spread them out in the district, have a wing of its own or a building of its own to support these programs?
So we're planning that. Actually,
Oh, hello, Director Kraft. How are you?
Good. Well, I don't want her to feel like she's being put on the spot. She's actually pitched a number of ideas, and they include both of those things. How do we grow the small nesting pieces in different places? How do we, just this year alone, doing the self-contained components, we've added that in some places to try to help with some of the other workload. But feel free to chime in. I think it's a little bit of both, but what we don't have is a building to put it all in. But I think that there could be benefits to a building or a section or something to, these are your words, but to really try to focus the resources. So if you only have that one speech pathologist, put them in an area where all those kids are available to have that service done, instead of trying to send them to 10 different schools.
No, thank you. That's the answer I was hoping for.
I do want to say, I've learned a lot over the last 3 years, and my mind seems to change when, as time goes on, about how to do things better. So I feel like there are some programs that I'd like to maybe separate a little bit, and then some that I think we could work better together and pool our resources together. So it would be less strains on the building. So it all depends on the building too, and if they're ready to have that level. So I take that into consideration and I bring it to Jake. And that's not always an easy task either, but It's really like monitoring the entire district all the time.
Going back to the student first theme, which I'm really for, that, I mean, in the building, when they can transition in the same building and see the same people, has great benefit than being in a school, even here in Lewiston, it's across town, and then being, it's like moving. So that's why I was bringing that up, is I'm really supportive of, if there's a way to make it happen where those students who have the capability can transition. And I have a special needs daughter, 34 still is, but that her program was a couple real classes, couple special education classes, and it really worked well all the way across the program.
Yeah.
And to me, I think that's very beneficial.
Yeah, I think anytime we can get them with their gen ed peers, and like the unified I worked at the high school for a long time. It's the best thing to watch, being able to participate in unified gym, unified basketball. And you don't always get those chances or opportunities. Yep. And with the staff shortage over the last couple of years, we really had to get creative and figure out pairings for, rather than doing 1-to-1s, which when I started here, there was a lot of 1-to-1s. We do 2-to-1s. Meaning, 2 students to 1 or 3 students to 1 ed tech. And it's gone well. So, and I feel as though some of the special purpose private schools have a lot of 1-to-1s, and sometimes they'll have 2 ed techs and 1 student. And I worry about how they are going to survive after high school. Are we setting them up for the best success? I mean, and there are some students that, that's what they need. And we need that level of service outside of Lewiston Public Schools, but I think we could do more here.
Counselor Najib?
I would just say quickly, and this isn't necessarily for you, Director, but maybe it is. When we're talking about the programming, showing the work, I think would be important for what we've already accomplished and what we've saved, what we think the growth will be, what the expenses have increased by, and then, demonstrating how much we could save in that space. The more information we have in order to both evaluate what it's worth and then also be able to explain to people why they would be seeing an increase, I think would be, very beneficial.
Member Eames?
Just, I do think that that information is available. We've been hearing it over the years, and I think it will be able to come to you quickly. Yeah.
Member Bowden?
I'll just say one more thing. And I said it last time. It's super important, I consider myself a fiscal conservative. I do not want to see my taxes go up, but I know my taxes are going up. And at the same time, being on the school committee and understanding this, and I've been listening to Director Crafts for 3 years now, explain her vision. And we've already done one phase of it and it's worked great. She was the first one to say, hey, if you can give me this, I'm going to cut this. She's been super great about coming to us with her needs and then backing up what she's saying. And the need just keeps getting greater. And so when you're talking to a constituent, to a taxpayer who's angry about their, well, why is the school budget so high? This is all you got to say. You have to bring up the special education piece, because that's really what the majority of the increase is. And it kind of has to happen this year. I just don't see a way around it. It's only to serve our kids. And I mean, there can be legal ramifications too if we're not taking care of these kids the way that they need to be cared for. And to bring them back, I mean, I don't need to say it again because it's already been said by everybody, but it's just super important that they're here in Lewiston, and we're doing our best to give them what they need.
Counselor Sol?
I just wanted to say, while my granddaughter was at Farwell, she did fantastic. The programming, I'm not sure where she went, is great. I mean, she was really thriving, just doing fantastic. I don't know what happened in this. It was like 3 months she was over in Auburn, but then they shipped her over to Winthrop. So whatever you guys are doing, you're doing a really good job. She did, it was night and day from when she started. They put her into kindergarten. She learned how to be in kindergarten, and it's just fantastic. So I appreciate all you do.
And just to come back to that point too, I guess it's like the holistic educational approach, right? Where right now, if you're sending a kid, for instance, to Saco, you're probably not getting a lot of support from the parents for this school system, even if they would be people who would be normally engaged. It's one of those things that like it's hard to quantify what individuals will put in to the school system when their children are their needs are being met within it, but it's certainly that type of support that it has a lot of value and sometimes it comes at absolutely no cost. So just want to put.
There's, I'm a big teddy bear, but there's also sentimental pieces to this too. When a kid can hear a morning announcement, have lunch with some kid in their neighborhood, the pep rally, award ceremonies, just the whole thing is just so deep, so deeply rooted, especially in our community in Lewiston with Go Blue and Pride, and there's so much to that. And when I think about things like the 14-year-old, which I don't have a full context of that, I just know that happened recently and some awareness of it. But what if that kid's been sent somewhere else every day for school? What ownership do they have in this community or belief set that I belong here, I'm welcome here, I'm part of this thing? And I think that's another not easy to quantify piece to your point. But that's what the school experience is about. For kids who don't otherwise have that opportunity to chase that, when we can provide it in-house, I think we should. If you can save money doing it, then we have to find a way to have that longer term trajectory.
Any other questions or comments? Counselor Shin?
Thank you. I certainly appreciate the teddy bear superintendent. And I realize that there are at least two strong benefits to bringing this private special education back to Lewiston. But I would encourage that, as I said at city council meeting the other day, we're talking about investing a lot of money in a truck wash that will clean the vehicles and make them last longer. Sounds like a great idea, but also let's set in place the systems that will quantify our savings so that we can look back. And I didn't realize that we've started this program. We'd like to be able to look back and say, okay, this is what our constituents are asking. Why are we spending $10 million this year? Because over the next 12 years, we're going to save $14 million. That kind of, I'm an engineer, so that kind of hard data is really important to me. Thank you.
So this will conclude our joint section of the meeting. We have a school committee agenda only to continue with. Oh, go ahead, Mayor.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank the school committee and the school staff for all the work you guys have done. And yeah, I mean, I firmly believe that the budget should be a reflection of our values. And I'm looking forward to working with the council and school committee to get that done this year.
Thank you. Do we need to vote to adjourn or do they just leave?
I think just for public purposes, I think we should vote to adjourn
Okay.
and then we will actually call the next meeting to order because it's school committee only items.
I move to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Member McLaughlin.
Get it.
All in favor? Are those opposed? Why are you looking at me like that?
I'm not certain that I'm voting. Is this a school board meeting?
We're ending the joint session and then we're gonna go back into school committees exclusively.
You guys make that decision. We're guests.
Oh, normally we would vote to adjourn and everyone would vote.
Okay, I'm in favor of adjourning.
Okay, I think that's unanimous. And we will take a 5-minute break, yes. We are back into regular session at 7 p.m. with agenda item number 6, to review and potentially vote on property being facilitated by the city of Lewiston to sell 100 by 100 square foot of Franklin pasture to Mears to expand parking.
So sorry for the tricky language on this one. So this wouldn't actually be the school committee's decision. Because the way the property works, because it's part of Franklin pasture, is actually a function of cities, at least my understanding. The city administrator reached out to me to say, hey, look, this proposal has come in. I was able to talk to Abdi Kadir from Mears to understand the request, but essentially what they want to do is they want to add a 100-foot by 100-foot parking lot behind their building off of Bartlett. And bordering that is like the pathway. It goes uphill a little bit, and then it's the walking path. And so the city can facilitate this, but we did think it important to at least bring to you so you were aware that sometimes that perception of, well, wait a minute, that's school property, and is it school property or city property? And there's always this gray line. So we thought it best to bring to you to say that at least my recommendation to you, but you can ask any questions you have and ultimately decide. My recommendation is just to say that it's fine for the city to broker this conversation, but I also didn't want you to see a parking lot show up connected to what looks like behind one of our schools belonging to a separate entity and be like, well, wait a minute, I didn't know that was happening. So that's really what this was about. Parking in that specific area, especially during prayer on Friday afternoons, is especially congested because of the fall worship there. And so this might help with some of that congestion with people being able to park behind Mears to add to that space.
Councilor McLaughlin. Member McLaughlin?
So just, we're talking about literally just that little patch behind the Mears building between that and the path. Okay. And so just to clarify, you don't see any other use for the school system there?
Not only do I not see any other use, it's to each side of it, there's either significant underground water channels or sewerage and water treatment related underground pieces that were part of that path being built. There's a pretty big substructure there, so to do something different there would be incredibly challenging. And then on another side, it's pretty wet. And then if you go further, towards the new park, you hit the parking lot that's already there existing. So it's a pretty small patch in the grand scheme. I don't see it being usable, and the substructure below it, I think, would create significant challenges if you want to do something more major there, structurally or anything like that.
Member Eames?
I was just curious about the path. Is there any plan to elevate that? I have this feeling there was, and so I'm just asking, am I dreaming that, or is that something real?
So the only elevating of that path that I'm aware of was when they built Connors and they decided to make that path run from the school all the way down through into the downtown area. That was in part when the city did their sewer or groundwater water treatment related work. Also tied into that is the new field complex where the turf has a significant drainage set up, and that all ties in down there. So I think part of the elevating the path, if we're talking about the same thing, was connected to when they did that work. That path kind of did go low and then kind of back up, and now it sits up I'm not looking at it, but I want to say 4 or 5 feet. I feel like it kind of slopes up and then the path is up higher.
Thanks. I noticed it was on the city council agenda for tomorrow, so I'm glad we're doing it now. I have no objection at all. I have been involved a little bit with the mosque's attempt to also do a parking lot also in that area, but behind the mosque. And so I was interested to see that both plans were going along. And I think both plans would help tremendously on Fridays.
I don't know of a plan behind the mosque, and I don't know what I'd have to look at that surface and what that entails, but we had prints shared with us and topography.
They own that. It's not encroaching on us.
Okay. I was gonna say, because I don't know if that's usable or not.
Without Bruce here, I'm probably gonna say this all wrong, but I just remember when we were doing the Connors project, there was some parts of Franklin pasture are protected wetlands, and so there had to be like an exchange. If we used certain areas, it had to be relocated somewhere else in Lewiston. Is that an issue, or it's probably a city issue, but
Well, so it's an issue, but it's been factored. So what it is the Franklin pasture is considered a federally protected green space. And so until that field was available on Bartlett Street, we were operating on the fringes of that. And so in any one year, any green space impact had to have a mitigation plan. I may be using the wrong terms, but there's a whole federal process. So by Hudson bus lines no longer being there and having that become a green space, it shifted the preservation strategy of having so much space be green. And so this would be allowable in that context, even though it's part of the Franklin pasture.
Any other questions or comments?
You don't need a motion.
No.
No.
Oh, to potentially vote, yes.
I would recommend a vote, just that the school committee is aware and is approve of the city executing this, on behalf of the city.
I'll make a motion then
Motion by member Ames,
to approve. this.
seconded by member Gallant.
Okay.
Any further discussion? Everybody knows what we're voting on. Okay, all in favor? It is unanimous. Agenda item number 7, to enter into executive session to discuss a personnel matter in accordance with 1 MRSA 4056A.
So moved?
Seconded by member McLaughlin. All in favor? School committee is in executive session at 7:06 PM.